Critical thinking doesn't start with brilliance, and it doesn't start with books. It usually begins with a quiet discomfort, the kind that shows up when the world refuses to match the version of events someone carries in their head. Most people go through life trusting their first impressions, assuming their reactions are reliable and their beliefs are self-chosen. They don't realize how much of their thinking is inherited from family, culture, social pressure, or simple habits. They move through their days on mental autopilot, reacting more than observing, repeating conclusions they never pause to question. The moment someone decides to think critically is often the moment they realize something feels off. Maybe they catch themselves defending an idea they don't fully believe in. Maybe they notice they keep ending up in the same kinds of arguments or making the same kinds of mistakes. Or maybe they finally admit that their certainty isn't actually certainty, it's just comfort. That crack in the illusion is where critical thinking starts. It's rarely a grand revelation. It's more like noticing the faint sound of a drip in a quiet room, and realizing you either ignore it or go looking for the source. Once someone starts paying attention, they discover that their mind is a maze full of shortcuts and blind spots. The brain wants efficiency, not truth. It fills gaps, jumps to conclusions, and filters reality through emotion, ego, and memory. Critical thinking requires confronting this messy inner landscape without pretending it's cleaner than it is. You learn how often your opinions rest on emotion disguised as logic. You notice how quickly you defend beliefs that make you feel secure rather than beliefs that are actually supported by evidence. You see how the ego tries to protect itself from embarrassment by clinging to old ideas long after they've stopped being useful. This stage feels unsettling because questioning your assumptions doesn't just change your thoughts, it changes your identity. People underestimate how attached they are to being right. They underestimate how hard it is to accept uncertainty when certainty has always felt like safety. But if you want to think with clarity, you have to learn to sit with that uncomfortable space where you don't know yet, where the answer is not obvious, where your old conclusions no longer hold up. Mastery begins in that space. As you get better at observing your mind, you start noticing the subtle psychological habits that shape your judgment. Confirmation bias becomes obvious in the way you search for information that reinforces your beliefs while conveniently ignoring what doesn't. Emotional reasoning reveals itself in moments when you're convinced something is true simply because it feels true. Projection becomes clear in the way you attribute your own fears or motives to someone else. These aren't just abstract ideas from psychology textbooks, they show up in everyday conversations, arguments, relationships, and decisions. You begin to realize how much of what you once called thinking was just reacting. With practice, critical thinking starts to feel less like a skill and more like a posture. You pause before you leap. You listen longer than you speak. You test your own beliefs with the same scrutiny you apply to others. You notice when you're being swayed by emotion, when you're rushing to judgment, or when your ego wants to protect an old identity. You learn to ask the questions most people avoid. What if I'm wrong? What evidence would actually change my mind? Am I trying to understand the situation or am I trying to win? This honesty doesn't make life easier. If anything, it makes it heavier because you carry the responsibility of seeing things clearly. It can be lonely to think independently, especially in a world that rewards conformity and quick conclusions. People like neat stories, clear villains, and fast answers. Critical thinking requires stepping outside that comfort, choosing accuracy over approval and truth over certainty. Yet something shifts when you truly commit to this way of thinking. You become harder to manipulate. You stop letting fear or ego guide your choices. You recognize patterns in your behavior and can break them instead of repeating them. You learn to understand people instead of judging them. You become less reactive and more intentional. Conversations become more meaningful because you're not just waiting for your turn to speak, you're actually listening. Mastery is never complete. Even the sharpest thinkers are vulnerable to bias and emotion. The difference is that they know it. They remain open to correction, curious about perspectives that challenge them, and humble enough to admit when they've overlooked something. Critical thinking is a lifelong practice of observing your mind with clarity, honesty, and patience. It's the choice to live awake rather than sleepwalk through your own thoughts. In the end, the art of critical thinking is not about outsmarting anyone. It's about developing a relationship with your own mind that is grounded in awareness instead of assumption. When you learn to think this way, your decisions become clearer, your relationships become healthier, and your life becomes more your own. You're no longer controlled by automatic reactions or unquestioned beliefs. You become someone who sees reality as it is, not as you wish it to be, and that clarity is what allows you to move through the world with purpose and integrity.